Hey, welcome to a new video. So we are about a week into March and I thought that I would do a nice little wrap up of all the books that I read in February. So let's get started. I'm just gonna go through them in the order that I read them during the month. So the first one, already talked about a little bit in the book haul that I got this one in, but it is The Twisted Ones by T. Kingfisher. And this is my very first T. Kingfisher read, and I was really looking forward to it. Not gonna lie, it was a little bit of a letdown. So this one ended up being about 3.5 stars, and it is about our main character. His name is Melissa, but she goes by Mouse, and she goes down to North Carolina to take care of her grandmother's estate after her grandmother passed. Her father, which is her grandma's only kid, is in his 80s and he's not in the best of health. It's kind of falls onto Mouse to take care of everything. So when she gets down there, she realizes that her grandmother was a really bad hoarder. She was not aware of this, and neither was her father, because they kind of distanced themselves from her grandmother. She was not a very nice lady. She was very mean and bitter about everything and just treated everybody really poorly. So Mouse kind of wasn't around her grandmother all that often during her life. And she's making her way through this house, trying to clean up everything and just basically get rid of things so that way her and her father can sell the house and take the money for themselves and just be done with it. They just don't want anything to do with the land that the house resides on. So she's going through all this stuff and she ends up coming across a diary that belonged to her grandmother's second husband, whom she calls her step-grandfather, because she met him a couple of times when she was a young kid and he was really nice to her. Other than that, she really had no connection with the guy. And so she's reading his diary and she's learning that is kind of weird, and a lot of things that he's writing about don't make a lot of sense. But the deeper into this diary that she gets, a lot more strange things start happening around the house at night. She's on a walk with her dog in the forest one day, and she comes across this tunnel. It's like a tree-lined tunnel, and she goes down it, and she comes out the other side, and she's on this like hill that, geographically speaking, can't realistically be in like the area of North Carolina that she is in right now. It makes no sense and she doesn't understand it, and she sees these weird spooky rocks that have strange carvings on them. She just gets like a weird eerie sense about everything, and so she goes home and like things kind of progress from there. She kind of like talks to some of the locals, finds out more about like the folklore of the area. I'm pretty sure that's what this book ended up being about, is like weird folklore, spooky things. I don't know. It was a fine read. It had a couple like good spooky moments at the beginning of the book, but then they kind of just fell off and the ending was not spooky at all, which is what I really wanted from it. I kind of wanted those like good scare vibes, and I didn't really get it. It had long stretches of just boring moments where she's just like complaining about cleaning out the house, and she makes friends with some of the locals, and it was a fine read, but I didn't enjoy it, and I didn't really like the way it was written. It wasn't my favorite. She likes to talk to the reader, and I don't really like books that break that kind of like barrier. It wasn't for me, and that's kind of disappointing. The next one I also have the physical copy of. It is A Novel Obsession, and this was my first 5-star read of the month. It's by Caitlin Barash, and it is about our main girl, Naomi, and she has just entered her very first relationship with Caleb, who is from Wales. They are living in New York City. Everything's going great in the relationship until she finds out that Caleb's ex, Rosemary, actually lives in New York City along with them. She just kind of assumed that his ex-girlfriend was from Wales and like lived back in Wales, but then she finds out that Rosemary is actually American and lives in the city, and she's the reason that Caleb moved stateside in the first place. And that kind of like triggers a little curiosity in Naomi. She wants to know more about this Rosemary person and what was so special about her and what Caleb loved about her. This curiosity kind of turns into just a little internet cyber stalking, like following her Instagram, figuring out what she does during her day, and then it kind of progresses to her stalking her in real life. She like waits outside of her work building, and then Naomi will follow Rosemary all the way back to her apartment, and then eventually it progresses again, and Naomi introduces herself to Rosemary, not obviously saying that she's dating Caleb now. No. She has to like find some things that they have in common that she's like discovered from stalking her. So books is one of the big things because Naomi is a writer. She's published a couple of short stories so far, and this is like her big grand novel that she wants to write, but she's been struggling with it. She doesn't have like any inspiration because she usually takes inspiration from things that have happened to her in the past. When she becomes obsessed with Rosemary, she's like, all right, this is gonna be the topic of my next novel. So she basically justifies all of her stalking and creepy, gross behavior as just being research to make the best novel that she can write. Things get wild and weird, and I couldn't put the book down, and I just had to like know how it ended, and I'm pretty happy with it. But I will say that if you're sensitive to certain topics, that I would for sure look up trigger warnings for this book, because there's an incident in her past when she's like studying abroad in Australia where she meets a guy and something bad happens. I'll just leave it at that, but I would recommend looking up the trigger warnings. But overall, I thought it was a great book, 5 stars. I loved it. So the next book that I did was for a romance reading vlog, and it was Girlfriend Material by Katya Rose. I gave it 4 stars. Overall, it was a good book. I had a pretty good time. So it was about our 2 main heroines, Kate and Allison. Allison is kind of like the quirky, just kind of clueless friend. She's been out as lesbian for a number of years, but she's never dated anyone, and she is close to graduating college, and she kind of made like a deal with herself that before she graduated college, she was gonna have her very first girlfriend. It's approaching the end of college, and she still hasn't been able to achieve that because every time she talks to a pretty girl, she just kind of like shuts down. She like stutters, can't form like a coherent thought. She just nothing works for her. But her best friend, on the other hand, Kate, she has kind of just sworn off dating and relationships completely. She thinks they're a waste of time. She doesn't believe in them. Before the start of this book, she was fine with hookups, but then she just kind of came to the conclusion that she didn't really like that either. It wasn't making her feel very good. So she's just kind of like quit all of it completely. That's where like the beginning of this book starts. Allison is kind of desperate for her first girlfriend. So she turns to her best friend Kate, and she's like, look, you are just so beautiful and so talented, and you can get anyone that you set your sights on. So please, can you teach me how to talk to people and flirt with people and like the art of seduction. She gets Kate to start teaching her. In the process of Kate trying to help her get a date with this girl that's also in their class, they get even closer together. Things get flirty and fun. Feelings start to like bubble to the surface that have maybe been buried for, a couple years of their friendship. It was just adorable, and I had a lot of fun. And like the third act conflict was a kind of conflict that I enjoy reading in romance novels, because I really can't stand when there's just like a big blow up fight at the end and then all of a sudden they like get back together. I can't stand that. But this one was more along the lines of Kate acknowledging that she's got a lot of emotional baggage that she's been dealing with, or not dealing with, that she's been like burying for years, that she needs to deal with before she can be a good partner to Allison. She really has to like explore those feelings, understand why she doesn't believe in love and relationships. That's where my big complaint about this book comes in, is that Kate's whole reason for not wanting to date stems from her high school boyfriend, and he was kind of just like, honestly, just a dumb teenage boy. He said some not very nice things about her to his friends, but she overheard, and that really hurt her feelings. And instead of talking to him about it, which I get, you know, she was like 17 at the time, still, she just, instead of talking to him, she just like stopped talking to him completely, stopped dating him, which then made him upset and say more nasty things, which is not okay on his behalf. But then she lets those things that he said about her dictate how she moved forward with her life, and then that caused emotional damage and problems. And it was all essentially resolved when she just talked to him again in the current timeline. This is so stupid. Like, I can't stand it. She let this stupid teenage boy ruin how she viewed herself and how she viewed relationships and love. And like, it didn't need to be that way. Like, he wasn't all that special. That was my biggest complaint about this book. But overall, it was good. I gave it 4 stars. And then the next book that I read, which was also for that same romance reading vlog, was When You Least Expect It by Haley Cass. And this is my second 5-star read for the month. It is about our 2 main characters, Caroline and Hannah. And it's from Caroline's perspective. She is a divorce attorney, and she ends up getting hired by Hannah to help Hannah divorce her soon-to-be abusive ex-husband. The divorce gets wrapped up pretty quick, I'd say within like the first 20% of the book. The whole divorce process is wrapped up, and then like the rest of the book is like their budding friendship and romance. The book spans the course of a year, so it's like Christmas from the previous year until Christmas of the current year. I really enjoyed how like long the timeline was. We see them go from like acquaintances, develop a friendship, and Caroline, becomes more involved in Hannah's life as Hannah's trying to like take back control of her life. She is working again. She's taking care of her 9-year-old daughter. She is going back to school and just like really taking back her life, because when she was married to the husband, he was really controlling and he didn't want her to work. She was pretty isolated from the world, and her mother ended up passing while they were married. Kind of had like nobody but her daughter. So she is like really learning how to be independent again and getting her freedom back. Watching Hannah come into her own person from Caroline's perspective is really sweet, so cute and wholesome, and the moments that they have with like Caroline and Hannah's daughter Abby is just so precious, and they just feel like a cute little family. And I loved all those like just mundane moments of them going to the park or celebrating holiday events together and just like getting closer. And I actually felt their friendship developing was genuine, and I could see it and I could feel it. I truly enjoyed it. So then like relationship, their feelings start like bubbling to the surface, and they're having a hard time like denying them anymore. It's so satisfying of a payoff. It was great. I loved it. The next one is The Haunting of Bryn Wilder by Wendy Webb. And I got this on Audible, and this book kind of deceived me like a lot. I gave it a 4-star because in the end I thought it was a good book, but it is not what I signed up for. Okay, so I thought this book was gonna be a haunting ghost story with lots of spooky vibes and like maybe a creepy boarding house, and I was really looking forward to that. And it just, it had some of that. It had some. But honestly, it was just a really sad story. It made me cry so hard at the end. It was kind of devastating, and I resent it just a little bit for making me cry so hard. So let me try and talk about this without spoiling anything. Okay, so it is about our main character, Bryn, and Bryn has decided to take the entire summer off. She's on a sabbatical from her teaching position at the local university. She goes to this lakeside town. Her friend has a bed and breakfast up there with her husband. And so she convinced Bryn to come up. She's not actually staying at her friend's bed and breakfast. She's staying at a different like boarding house kind of place. She rents this room for the whole summer. It's got like a pretty good cast of characters, a lot of the local people from the town, and they're all just so cute and nice and just good cozy vibes. There's a couple other people that are staying in this boarding home with her. There's a single guy named Dominic, and he's like covered in tattoos, and he's pretty mysterious. Nobody knows like anything about him. And then there is a older, they're like in their 50s, I think, gay couple that vacation here every summer. They have one of their ex-wives living with them. I don't remember the names. The ex-wife is named Alice, though. She kind of has a pretty big role in this book. But Alice and her husband were together for like 20 plus years before her husband was like, I love you and I'll always love you, but I need to be me, and me is gay. So they get a divorce. Where the story is taking place, Alice has moved in with them for the summer because Alice has dementia, pretty aggressive, and she's only in like her late 50s. So she's not doing well, and so her ex-husband and his new husband are taking care of her. So Bryn is just trying to like enjoy her life and like try and have a good summer. She's dealing with her own problems. Her mother recently passed away after a very long fight with cancer that Bryn had to basically take care of her the entire time. Bryn is really still grieving after the loss of her mother, and so that's why she's taken time off from work and is honestly kind of dreading going back to work. So she just needs the summer to think things over and try and sort out where she wants her life to go from here. So then she ends up becoming friends with this gay couple and with their ex-wife, Alice. And Alice ends up saying really weird things to Bryn and some of the other people. She knows things that she couldn't possibly know. Things from like Bryn's past. She's like kind of talking about the future. Honestly, it's like, okay, is Alice like psychic or something? Like, what's going on here? There's also a mystery that takes place in this book. So the couple that own the boarding house that Bryn is staying at, every winter they close the boarding house down and pack up and go to Hawaii for the entire winter season because they really rely on tourism, and tourists just don't come to this lakeside town during the winter. So when they come back, they find that somebody had broken in and had been living in one of their rooms and ended up dying there. But nobody knows who it was. Nobody saw anyone coming or going during the entire winter season. They never saw any lights on in the boarding house. So it's just a complete mystery. Nobody can identify who this woman is. So that's kind of like the underlying mystery spanning this whole book. Kind of goes along. Bryn's experiencing some weird kind of ghostly encounters during the night. Weird things are happening. Some of them actually like spooked me pretty good. Since I listened to it on audio, I really like how the narrator got into those like creepy moments. It was great. It was great. I don't know how else to explain it, but it was good. And then there's like a romance that goes on between Bryn and Dominic. I feel like that's honestly all I can talk about without ruining what the rest of this book is about. But it has a twist. It has a twist probably about 80% of the way in, and it just like, it takes a turn. And it was a turn I was not expecting. It felt so deceptive. so deceptive and so sad. And I can't say it because I don't want to spoil this book for anybody who might want to read it. But it was good. The next one is Girls of Bracken Hill by Kate Moretti. And this was my third 5-star of the month. I love this one. It's another mystery thriller. And it had the best twist. One of the twists I kind of figured out, but I don't hate that I figured out. And it always makes me feel so smart when I figure them out. But then the other big twist, I didn't see coming. And it just like blew my mind. I loved it. I loved it. Okay, so let me try and tell you what this one is about. So we have our two sisters. We have Hannah and Julia. It's a dual timeline. So we have the past and then we have the present. The past takes place while the girls are like in their teenage years. And the current is when Hannah is in her early 30s. In the past, when the girls were, I think Hannah was like 11 to 15, and then her sister was like a couple years older than her. They spend 5 summers with their aunt and uncle in New York State. They go and visit their aunt and uncle who live at this house that's called Bracken Hill Manor. Hannah loves going there because she loves this house. She thinks it's so magical and it's like a fantasy come true, and it's on this huge plot of land, and they have woods all around them, so she gets to explore the woods all the time with her sister, and she loves it. And it's kind of like an escape for her from her real life back home with her mom and her stepdad. I will say, trigger warnings for this book. The mom is kind of just absent. She works all the time to provide, because the stepfather, he's like an alcoholic piece of shit who does nothing but drink and sit on the couch all day. And he is not a good guy. And he is not a good guy to these two girls. And I will leave it at that. So Hannah loves going, and Julia love going to visit their aunt and uncle because it's just an escape from their real life. And so as the years go on, Julia is getting older, and she wants to make friends with some of the local girls in the small town that's like down the hill from their aunt and uncle's estate. Hannah kind of like resents her basically for growing up and not wanting to play the like make-believe games that she still likes to play. But basically something happens the 5th year that the girls are there visiting their aunt and uncle, and Julia ends up going missing. She just disappears one night and nobody can find her. And that's the last time that Hannah ever goes back and sees her aunt and uncle. In the current timeline, Hannah gets a phone call from the police of that town, and she finds out that her aunt, whom she hasn't spoken to in like 15 years, has been in a terrible car accident and she's passed away. So Hannah needs to come and take care of things because she's the only family left alive. Hannah's own mother passed away a couple years ago, and then Hannah's uncle has terminal cancer. So he's not doing well. He's bedridden. He's kind of in a vegetative state. He hasn't spoken in months. They have a live-in nurse that takes care of him. So Hannah has to come and plan funeral arrangements for her deceased aunt and figure out what they're gonna do with her uncle. And while she's there figuring out everything, she's kind of like reliving her past and remembering all those summers ago, and her sister, who's still missing at this point. She basically is like, bad things keep happening to the women in my family, and this house is kind of like the cause of it, basically. So she starts digging around and trying to figure out, you know, what actually happened to her sister. And I'm sorry, I'm gonna leave that. But it's great. The twists are great. I love them. I had a great time with this book. Highly recommend. Highly recommend. The next one is The Secrets of Us by Lucinda Berry. And this is another mystery thriller. It wasn't super thrilling. Maybe like a soft thriller. I gave this 3.5 stars, and it is about Crystal and Nicole. They call themselves sisters. They're not blood related, but they are foster sisters. So they were early teens, preteens, when they got taken into the foster care system and placed with this woman and her daughter. And their foster home is not the greatest. They live on a farm, and basically their foster mom uses both Crystal and Nicole as free farm labor. But they excel at school and they excel at sports, especially track, and they're just trying to like make everything good to set up a great future, so once they turn 18 they can like get out of the foster care system and set themselves up for a bright future. But something happens, this is also a dual timeline, something happens in the past that they end up running from and trying to keep hidden. In the present, the book starts off with Crystal getting a call saying that her sister is in the psychiatric hospital and she's being held in isolation for 72 hours because she tried to murder her husband. She like set him and the whole house on fire and like locked him in and tried to murder him. And when the police showed up, she was dancing around the lawn and like shouting and so excited that she's killed him. And so it's not looking good for Nicole. The more that Crystal talks to Nicole and like digs into it, it's obvious that something has happened. Nicole keeps saying that's not her husband, that essentially like a body snatchers event has happened. That guy may look like her husband, but it's not her husband. And she is convinced of that. Basically, the story is about Crystal digging into the events leading up to the arson and trying to find out like what happened and like what has set off this psychiatric break with Nicole. And it was just fun. It has some decent twists, kind of. I guess some things that happened like I didn't see coming, but they also didn't like wow me all that much. I just kind of came out of the book feeling like, yeah, that was a fine read. It was just okay. Then the next one is Better Than Expected by Haley Cass. This one was the lowest rated book that I read this month. It's only 3-star, so it's not terrible. It is a companion novella to When You Least Expect It, which I really loved, and is the whole reason why I read this. It's that whole year period, plus a little snippet from further in the past, and then little snippets from in the future of their relationship, but from Hannah's perspective. And that's the key difference. It's from Hannah's perspective, not Caroline's this time. As much as I loved the first one, and like I fell in love with Hannah from Caroline's perspective, being in Hannah's head instead, I did not enjoy. I ended up really not liking her. She was just honestly super stubborn and super frustrating, and I get that she was trying to like reclaim her self-identity and her independence and her freedom and trying to like be there for her daughter and be the only one to provide for her daughter because her ex-husband's garbage. But she just frustrated me and it was annoying and I didn't enjoy it. It's also super boring. Reliving the moments from her perspective, I guess, is understandable, but I just assumed that I wouldn't mind because I loved the first book so much, but I did mind. So it was fine. In the end, I think I just didn't really need this novella. I would have been completely fine having it end where it did and not read any further on. The next one was Kismet by Amina Akhtar, and I gave this one 3.5 stars. It's another audio listen. It's another mystery thriller. It's kind of like the books I was reading last month. It is about our main character, Rani Khan. She is a Pakistani American woman who's grown up in, I think it was Brooklyn, her entire life. Her parents passed away when she was like 5 years old, and her mother's sister was already living with her, but then like took on the parental role when her parents died. And her aunt is not a nice lady. She basically used their culture as a way to justify her being abusive to her niece. And I didn't appreciate that. I guess this is kind of like, no, I wouldn't call this a dual timeline. We have flashbacks to the past that show a lot of verbal abuse and just like the aunt belittling and telling her niece that she is garbage and useless. She will never be anything and can never do anything right. And just like, you know, constantly beating her down. So those like flashbacks in time really like show you why Ronnie is the way that she is. But in the current timeline, she has moved to Sedona, Arizona with her new best friend, who is a rich white lady. Her name is Marley, and she is a life coach, wellness guru. Marley convinced Ronnie to move with her to Arizona and start a new life together there. A town that's like really big on like yoga and like hippie culture and like crystals, that kind of stuff. So they move there. Ronnie is honestly just trying to figure out who she is now that she is out of the control of her aunt, figure out where she wants to go with her life, who she wants to be as a person. So she ends up making friends with some twin sisters that run the local crystal shop. She gets a job with them and she's really starting to thrive and like come into her own person. Marley kind of doesn't like that. It's very obvious that she's kind of a toxic, controlling person. So she's just like another embodiment of the aunt. But then what makes this a mystery is that in this town, all these other wellness gurus or scam artists, essentially is what they are, keep disappearing and winding up dead. So the police of the town are trying to figure out what's going on. You're kind of trying to like solve it alongside. But the way that it's written, you kind of read from a couple different perspectives. You have Ronnie's perspective, you have the killer's perspective, and then you have the crow's perspective. And when I say the crows, I mean like the bird. Like there's a flock of crows that lives in the town, and they are a important part to this book, and it's really weird. And I honestly hated the crows chapters because the guy that narrated their crow voices, he really made a decision when he decided to speak for them. And I didn't like it. It was the most grating noise ever. Anyways, but because you can read from the murderer's perspective, you kind of figure out pretty early on who's doing the killing. And like they give you a reason why they're doing it, but then obviously later on you figure out the real reason why they're murdering everyone. And I will say, this book had some good twists that I didn't see coming, that surprised me, that I enjoyed. But overall, the story was just kind of fine. So coming to the last two books that I read, we have Satellite Love. So this is the last one that I have the physical copy of by Genki Ferguson. I love this cover. It's just so pretty. This book is sad. It's another one that I would recommend looking up the trigger warnings for because it is all about mental health, depression, suicide, isolation. So it is about our main character, Anna Obata, and she is a 16-year-old girl living in Japan, and it takes place over a couple months at the turn of the 21st century. So December 1999 into January of 2000 and a little bit into February. Anna lives with her mother and her grandfather. Her mother is pretty much never home. We honestly don't see her until the end of the book. She, I think, works in a city over and she's gone like all the time. So it's just Anna and her grandfather, and he has dementia. So he honestly doesn't really know who Anna is. He very rarely remembers that he has a granddaughter. We actually have a couple different perspectives that we read from in this book. So we've got Anna and we've got the grandfather, and then we have two others. Anna doesn't really have any friends. She's kind of weird and different, and so her classmates all make fun of her. That just leads to more isolation, and she doesn't really have anyone at home because grandfather pretty much sleeps all the time. So she's by herself a lot. So when she was younger, she had an imaginary friend called the Prince. Kind of meant like everything to her. So when she was younger, she would tell like all her classmates about the adventures that she would go on with the Prince. It used to be really cool, but as they get older, it stopped being cool to all the other classmates, and they eventually started making fun of her for it and bullying her. She kind of kills her imaginary friend. So then that just plunges her into more isolation and loneliness, she ends up kind of making friends with this new kid in town. His name is Soki. He has just moved to her town from Hokkaido. He has like his own kind of journey that he goes on in this book. So he grew up very religious and spiritual. His father was a priest in the shrines, and it really meant a lot to Soki. One year, his father just kind of like loses his faith. Because of that, he needs a new occupation now. He's been trying to find a new job. I think he gets one for like a couple months, and then like he moves on. So that's how come Soki and his family have ended up down in the southern part of Japan. So he's moved to Sakita. He meets Anna. They start to form a friendship. And then one day Anna is out and about and she sees Soki with another girl from their class. He's like taking this other girl out on a date because he really fancied her. And Anna gets really upset about this and she takes it personally, and she comes to the conclusion that Soki is just like all the other people in her class and all the other people in this town, and that he's just as cruel and mean and awful as the rest of them. So she just kind of like cuts him out and stops talking to him. So then she essentially creates a new imaginary friend. And I don't think that's a spoiler because she says it pretty early on. So the fourth perspective that we read from is the satellite's perspective. The satellite is called Leo, which stands for Low Earth Orbiting Satellite. Leo wakes up in his satellite body, thousands of miles above Earth, circling and like watching everything. And it's really fascinating seeing from like a machine's perspective of Earth and like watching all the little humans going about their business and like learning from a complete outsider's perspective. And one day he wakes up and he's in Anna's room. She just flat out tells him, she's like, I made you up. You don't exist. You're just a figment of my imagination. And you're gonna be my boyfriend. He kind of like delves into their friendship, but Anna has come to the conclusion that she wants to go to space with Leo. She wants to take him back home and she wants to go with him. So she's been building this rocket ship out of just random parts and things that she's been collecting and stealing. As the story goes on and the rocket is being built, you start to pick up on the fact Anna is not okay, and that this rocket ship that she's building and this adventure that they're gonna go on is a euphemism for suicide. It gets very heavy and very sad. I hesitate to recommend this book. As much as I enjoyed it, it was 4 stars. I just think it's a book that needs to be read with a lot of care. But yeah, I did enjoy this book. I think it was beautifully written. I enjoy the different perspectives from Anna's to Leo's and his like existential crisis that he has about not being real, even though he feels like he's real. The grandfather's perspective of like him trying so hard to remember and just like not knowing and being confused about what's going on. And Soki's perspective of him trying to really like understand his faith, dealing with moving to a new town. And I enjoyed it. It was good. And that brings us to the final book that I read, which is another sad book. I don't think that I like sad books, but apparently I read a lot of sad books. Or at least I did this past month. So this book is another one that I got on Audible. I actually found this book because Audible sent me an email and it's like, hey, we can like help you find your next read. Just take this little quiz. So I took the quiz and I honestly went through like all combinations of questions that you could answer to find out all the answers, to figure out all the book recommendations that they were giving with this quiz. And this was one of the books that they recommended. And it is The Mountains Sing by, I'm gonna try my darndest to pronounce this, Nguyen Phan Ke Mai. I believe she's Vietnamese. I gave this book 5 stars. I thought it was beautiful, but I thought it was heartbreaking and heavy. Okay, let me just explain it, what it is. So it is about this family. We have 2 main perspectives. We have the grandmother and we have the granddaughter. I am not going to say their names because honestly, I don't remember enough how to pronounce them. The grandmother is telling her granddaughter basically her life story. When we're from the granddaughter's perspective, we are in the 1970s, like late 1960s to early 1970s, and it takes place in North Vietnam during the Vietnam War. And then when we are from the grandmother's perspective, it spans several decades of her life, I think starting in the 30s and then into the 50s and then closer to present day. It goes through the chaotic turmoil that was Vietnam during the 20th century, from the land reformation to the occupation of Vietnam by France and China and Japan, and the introduction of communism into the country, the Vietnam War, the war between the North and the South after, I guess, the takeover of northern Vietnam into southern Vietnam after the United States has pulled out its support. The grandma was honestly like a true survivor. She had 6 children that she was trying to take care of, trying to protect while all these awful things were happening and while all her family members around her were being brutally murdered. She has to basically restart her life over multiple times, being moved around the country over and over again and just trying to provide a good life for her children and trying to protect them. And she makes some really hard decisions that some people don't agree with, that were hard to read about, but she did everything that she could to live and take care of her children. This is another one that I would look up the triggers because it takes place during a lot of war and bad things happen during war. And then when we're from the granddaughter's perspective and she's learning about her grandmother's life, and she's also learning about her aunts and uncles and her mother and the things that they've lived through, and especially the things as they're returning home from war. She's learning about the things that they experienced during the war and their stories, and it's all very sad and heavy, and a lot of people die. And I cried so many times. It kind of broke me. It was just so beautiful and it was so well written. And I really love listening to the audiobook because, one, it pronounced all the names in a way that I could not pronounce them because it pronounced them correctly. And then there were several like phrases in Vietnamese. I just loved listening to that, the songs that she would sing in Vietnamese, and it was just haunting and beautiful. And I really recommend this book. I know it's not going to be for everyone, but if you're into multi-generational stories about love and loss, and then I think you would enjoy this book. That is going to bring us to the end of the video. These are the 11 books that I read in the month of February. Thank you for listening to me talk for a very long time. I had a good reading month. I enjoyed several of these books. None of them were horrible. There were just some that I felt less passionate about, but it was a great month. I hope you had a great February as well. Thanks for watching another video. Have a great day.